you see here is a far cry from the Panthers of 1967, when the Penrith District Rugby League Club was admitted to the Sydney First Division competition.
This enormous complex is the product of the vision and drive of a Penrith team that operates both on and off the field. The team off the field has been responsible for the birth of what is now the largest rugby league club in the world, a symbol of the development of the Penrith community itself. On the field, the rise of the Panthers to become the premiers in rugby league is the subject of this story.
The Panthers' birth in First Division came about as the result of a difficult labour. The main architect of Penrith's advance from the junior ranks was Merv Cartwright, who'd been on the club's committee since the early 1940s.
Well, we had no club, it was just a band of dedicated blokes that loved the game of rugby league that used to raise the money to put footballers on the field.
Now, it was junior league days?
Junior league, yeah. We played in the Western District competition.
How much trouble did you have in getting the side to go from a junior league side to second division? That really fell on you, didn't it, to convince them?
Well, it was a pretty big annual meeting the night it was moved that we go, and we were pretty divided over it, but thank heavens we won the day and we decided to go and never looked back since then.
Why was there two schools of thought at the time?
Well, you've got to remember that the club was Penrith Junior Rugby League, and once we become a district club, well then the junior club had to go and find somewhere else to live.
Right, so did they have to basically relinquish control?
Well, once Penrith became a district club, they were just another junior club within our district.
In 1966, two second division clubs would be elevated to First Division the following year, with Cronulla and Wentworthville the favourites. Penrith targeted Wentworthville and launched a campaign to convince the New South Wales Rugby League that their case had more merit.
We got the message out here from a pretty reliable source that we weren't going up, that Wentworthville were going up with Cronulla. So it just meant that we had to do something. So I went to see the then Mayor Bill Chapman, the late Bill Chapman, and also Harold Core, the town clerk, and Bernie Smith, the engineer, and arranged a meeting with Bill Buckley and took them to Sydney. They had the meeting, and out of that we went up and Wendy stayed back.
What do you think it was that convinced the New South Wales Rugby League to admit Penrith? Because it was obviously a last-minute decision.
Well, I think that they were very impressed by the three men that went down there, and they could see they were sincere, and those three blokes didn't let anyone down. They did everything they said they'd do.
Don Feltus would one day be Penrith's general manager, but was on the original 1967 committee.
I remember that we played in those days in the middle of the showground, Penrith showground. And there was a tin shed that a lot of the old people would remember, the older fellas. And we used to meet in there after a game and drink plenty of beer and have raffles and raise money for the club. And when we became financial enough, there was a block of land secured in Station Street, and we moved across there. And of course, at the same time, they were endeavouring to get a licence so they could have licensed premises, poke machines and what have you, to raise some finance. And so they had a small rugby league committee as well as the licensed club committee, and I was on that rugby league committee for the first 12 months. Just about everything was done in those days voluntary because there was just no money in the kitty. So all of us used to take our turn at going down there and working in the club on a voluntary basis to assist with the running costs. But I remember the day that we decided to dig the foundations. Different people that had various resources like loaders and diggers and equipment, they arrived, and when there was quite a few of us there this Saturday morning, we decided we'd draw straws to see who had the pleasure and honour of digging the first sod out of the ground for the foundations. And while we were endeavouring to pick out who it was going to be, one of the other chaps that was there, a fellow by the name of Nobby Hunter, and a lot of people would remember Nobby, grabbed a mattock and dug a hole in the ground and threw it down and said, "There, I've beat the lot of you, I've done it." So Nobby's had the honour of digging the first bit of soil out for the foundations of the club.
It provided a competitive league side in a geographically unique sporting frontier.
It was a struggle. We didn't have much money, but the players we bought were ex-first graders, mainly from Balmain, who were finished their grade down there, and Laurie Fagan said the very first week here, he said, "We're not going to win the comp, mate," but he said, "No one's going to put us over us because we all know what it's about."
It had a reputation of being a very tough side.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, we had blokes like Bob Boland and the late Georgie Piper, who was the best clubman you could ever get, and Billy Tonkin, and we had the basis of a real good side, and a Kangaroo, Jack Sinclair. We had a good side out here, really.
Under the coaching of Leo Trevina, Penrith showed from the outset that they had the potential to develop into a league force. Among the 1967 recruits was Ron Workman, an RAAF Vietnam veteran who joined the club after emerging through the Parramatta juniors.
Put in by Bailey. The penalty goes against Bailey and feed out in the scrum by the Penrith hooker Ron Workman. A penalty to Balmain, and it's awarded.
Ron, praise to be the people who done the recruiting. They recruited rather well, and to come out of a second division era or second division side or competition and then go into a major league era of the 60s, which was quite a dynamic era in rugby league anyway. We had a good first 13. We had probably a good first 20, but we certainly got our share of injuries, and it was very hard. There was no easy game. If there was, you may be able to call one, but we never had an easy game. It was a hard season, 67, but we got our fair share. And we heard a few sides too.
Including
St George. Yeah, it was the first time St George. Yeah, it was a great moment in my life. And they had no excuses, Brian. They had the whole premiership team playing at Penrith Park. And sadly, that particular day was the last day Reg Gasnier played. He tried to sidestep and he just went down, and that was the end of his career. But on the Penrith side of it, was the greatest era of Penrith going into the premiership side, first grade premiership competition, because they were dancing the tables at Richmond RSL, I can assure you. But everyone was so elated, and it was a great stepping stone, I believe, to, well, it's been a long while, but that's where we are at the moment.
It must have been similar to, an atmosphere of a grand final win for Penrith to have knocked off that champion St George side at that time.
26-12.
You won the scrums 19-9.
That's right. Ian Walsh was hooking here. Yeah.
So that was a feather in your cap. I'm sure
great.
You remember
that.
Right, yeah. I'm sure you had no trouble recalling the figures.
I can remember it.
Everybody still recalls though that St George Day. They still look back on it as being a memorable thing.
Why not? Johnny,
I remember it as a kid.
Johnny Raper, Graham Linglands, Reg Gasnier, they had their top side in, and lowly Penrith come out and roll them. That was great.
There was also the chance of personal milestones for players who had joined from other clubs.
Leo Trevina rang up. I finished off the year with Parramatta, 66, and said Penrith were forming a side, but I'd like to participate in that particular side. And Bill Rayner was my immediate superior at Parramatta, a great old hooker. And I joined Penrith that particular year. And surprisingly enough, as history may repeat it, as history as is, the last time he played against Billy Rayner was the last time he played. I knocked him off, and he never played again. And we had a bit of a soft drink upstairs at Parramatta Ladies Club. It was quite sad because Bill was a legend in his day, and I was his number 2 for many, many years. And Brian, it was a sad moment.
Efforts like the one against St George were building spirit into the club. The Panthers recorded 5 wins in their first year and finished 11th, ahead of only fellow newcomers Cronulla. Penrith signed ex-Balmain star Bob Boland as captain-coach in 1968 and continued to improve. They finished just outside the semis on 22 points, bagging the club's first trophy in First Division when they beat Newtown 28-12 in the pre-season final. Penrith also played on the SCG for the first time in 1968 after being selected to play in the match of the day against South Sydney.
68, we had a good year. Bob Boland had them the first year, and we had a good year that year. And we did win a pre-season, and no, I thought we carried our weight pretty well, because we didn't have much money.
Who were the players that stood out for you during that time?
Oh, we had Laurie Fagan. I don't think there's a better half. Penrith's ever had a better half than Laurie Fagan. And Georgie Piper, Bob Boland. We had some great players. Graham Moran would walk into any first grade side in Sydney. And he did make the state side.
Penrith went into the 1969 season believing that they would make the semi-finals. 4 losses to start the year and 1-point losses to the top 5 sides made it Penrith's first year of disappointment. They finished 10th and heaped more administrative responsibilities towards Bob Boland in 1970 to try and turn things around. Penrith ran into problems in 1970 because Bob Boland was forced to retire early in the season and the side was placed into an on-field leadership vacuum. Penrith again finished a disappointing 10th and frustrations began to surface at committee level.
Penrith were probably looked upon as very much a side that it was a day trip to get there and a day trip back, you know, and though they strived to be professional and they tried everything, I think, in their mortal powers to be successful, and a lot of that, I suppose, can be accredited to blokes like Merv Cartwright and company, they certainly haven't got the things going for them that they have today. Today, they're probably the pace setter when it comes to being professional. Back in those days, without being offensive to them, though they strive to be professional, I'm sure there was a few things left undone.
A lot changed at Penrith in a very short time. Merv Cartwright had been ousted from his role as football club secretary in a boardroom coup. For a short time, Roger Cowan straddled the role of leagues and football club management, but on the field, the club were now entering a barren time. They began the 1971 season without players like Bob Landers, Maury Raper and Laurie Fagan, who had departed, and it was clear that the club would face a struggle to get back off the ropes. After starting the 1971 season badly, the team finished on well and went within 4 points of the semi-finals. The year saw the emergence of a young prop called Terry Geary, whose football philosophy was one of it's better to give than receive.
I started my training at Penrith and I thought, train and be competitive. And I can remember they bought players that year and they bought a fellow called Bruce Delaney, a front row, and I thought I can beat him. I targeted him every training session, that I'd beat him in arm presses, push-ups and everything, and I just trained myself that I wanted to be better. I didn't have any pattern of play. I was a defensive player, not an attacking player. And turned out that the first grade game was against South Sydney. And that was the golden years of South Sydney with the team that are here today. And I thought it was a privilege to play against them, especially John O'Neill and Sattler. And I thought, this is your chance. You've never been a first grade side. Please give it your best. So I went a little bit overboard and I was sent from the field.
Was that a privilege as well?
I thought it was good. One of their supporters spat at my face and said, I hope you get 8 weeks. I looked up in the grandstand, my wife was sitting up there next to Don Lane. I think she was barracking for South, but nobody recognised you when you put your coat and tie back on. I watched the game, we got a hiding, but...
How many weeks did you get?
Only got 2 weeks for that, but I'd need a bloke in the face deliberately.
Every scrum I went into, there was no easy competition. Every scrum you went into, you knew there was an absolute skill involved, the skill of survival, the skill of, you know, not losing sight of the objectives, and that was to win the ball.
Despite getting clouded
Despite getting clouded on the break. You know, you get your darn good share. Yeah, absolutely.
And you would have had to have had some pretty hard-hit front row forwards.
Well,
in there that, you know, they were as much a protection for the hooker as you know, as much as the role of scrummaging.
Well, I'd probably say out of it all, I've had to get surgery on both my eyes because I couldn't see out of them to fly. Because I was in aircrew and I could not, so in the end I ended up jumping on the slab and getting all the gristle cut out of my eyes because I couldn't see out of it. But I had Dollar Geary and some very good front rowers along the way, you know, and Bobby Boland and Georgie Piper. Georgie Piper was a very dear friend of mine, and he was a bit of a legend in his day, you know, old Dunny Do. Yeah. But we had some good backup.
Prior to the start of 1972, coach Bob Boland and Roger Cowan travelled to South Africa and came back with rugby union stars Peter Swanson and Keith Howie. These were the first of several flirtations that Penrith had with rugby union players, with virtually no results. By any accounts, the 1972 season was a disappointment, the only highlight being the representation of half Zach Olianik in the New South Wales side, becoming the first Penrith junior to achieve that height. But the bleak on-field performances again spilled over to the boardroom, and Bob Boland was sacked as coach and replaced by 1967 mentor Leo Trevena. But Trevena could not resurrect the spirit of '67, and Penrith slumped to pick up the wooden spoon in 1973. The year was noticeable for a massive hiding by Manly, who cleaned up Penrith with 14 tries and a record scoreline of 70-7. and a hiding at the hands of a star-studded Eastern Suburbs outfit. Shelling out record dollars, Penrith lured across English internationals Mike Stevenson and Bill Ashurst in 1974. Individually, both were brilliant footballers, but the two were different personalities, as referee Greg Hartley recalls.
I never had any problems with Mike. I think Mike was a real man on a football field, gave it his best, as did Ashurst. But Ashurst, on occasion, if he didn't get his own way, he was like a big tart, you know. He'd carry on. If it didn't suit him, well, he just wouldn't play. But he was a great exponent of the chip and chase, and his talents were second to none. But he was a moody sort of an individual, you know. I had a few run-ins with him. I had a few run-ins with Steve-O, called me a gaffer one day, and I thought he was swearing at me. So I threatened to send him off, and then he explained what the gaffer was, and he called me the boss, and I said, geez, I like that sort of talk. So Mike and I, from that point, got on very well.
Meanwhile, Penrith's resident smiling assassin, Terry Geary, had his own thoughts on referees.
I can remember Jack Harris used to introduce us and say, you know how to play, if you don't, you won't, meaning that you'll be sent from the field. Others went on again. That fellow called Page, Keith Page, I couldn't get on with him.
How about Hartley?
Well, I liked Greg Hartley. He was colourful, and he did send me in my last first grade game, but I was sent off against St George for fighting again. But
and what a sensational game that turned out. Penrith finished up winning it.
That's correct. They mustn't have missed me at all. But no, he was colourful. He was good. I liked him. I really did. And they exchanged a few drinks and everything. And they knew that rugby league was also being promoted in that era, and he was a new promotion. But Keith Page was a little bit of a silver tail, I thought, was recognising the city teams rather than the country teams. But however, the first grade game, I get sent off. I'm not sure who sent me, but it was I was antagonised that I must be successful, but don't let the side down. But I just went overboard.
Could you have gotten away with playing football the way you played it in those days in 1991?
No, I would have obviously been banned for long times. Things I used to say to Mick Stevenson, put my hand on his chest and say, Mick, I know they're fighting you. And I'm just loud enough for the referee to hear, I know they're biting, I'd say anything. But I worked it out, there was 0.2 of a second. The referee used to look across the back line. And I would hold my hand on his chest, turn it to a blade and bring it with a tremendous uppercut. And really, they did fall at my feet.
So you knew, you had it worked out with the particular referees that, you know, didn't quite fall into the pattern, or you knew all of them looked...
Well, they all did. They all did. They were all governed by the press to keep the 5 yards and make sure the centres aren't onside. And then when we had the tight head, I used to feel around the back of the temple, and honestly, I wouldn't like to think that my son played against a player that I used to do on the field.
You were a mean bugger, weren't you?
I was mean, but it was a privilege to play against some of those great players. Truly, you look at them, back at them through the eras, and you think of Billy Hamilton shaking your hand, Sattler pulling your jumper off and saying, mate, I don't know what you've got, you haven't got much ability, but you do yourself proud.
Penrith used a revolutionary four-man coaching panel in 1974, consisting of Jack Clare, Roy Masters, Barry Harris and Tom Wilson. But the system broke down because the coaches couldn't agree. Penrith improved slightly to finish 9th and made the final of the newly established midweek television competition, the Amco Cup.
The Amco Cup was the brainchild of Kevin Humphreys, who was the chairman of the league, and a fellow called Colin McLennan got tied up in it. They thought this thing was going to be good. I think it was called the Super League, and it eventually was picked up by Amco. And not a lot of clubs took it seriously. You know, I'm sure that every game of rugby league is serious, but a lot of them refused to put their top sides in, and there were always the doubting Thomases that said this won't work. But it did work, and it was that first year that Penrith and Western Division made the Cup final, and Penrith went out in the final to Western Division. But I think sort of Penrith did the Amco Cup, or the midweek competition. They did some good for the competition, in that Western Division proved that you could be the Cinderella and still win this competition. So what happened, we found clubs then starting after that to take it very seriously, and it grew to something that was very, very worthwhile.
Nonetheless, Penrith's 6-2 loss to Western Division would be their last chance to win a competition for more than a decade. In 1975, Penrith made Stevenson captain-coach, but it was a move that only inflamed the rivalry between the Panthers-English duo, and further splinters in the relationship began to emerge. In 1976, the Panthers' on-field performances followed a similar pattern to 1975, a good start followed by a mid-season slump. Ron Workman was now administering the football club's affairs, and it was an era of innovation. Many of Workman's concepts resulted from a trip to the US during the year.
That to me was, I'm surprised no one else had really made the effort to, okay, a lot of people made the effort to look at the game of gridiron, but not many people made the effort to look at the administrative aspects and revenue generation of a product, and the product is rugby league. And I did return, and with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm towards why can't we make money out of a product which costs us a lot to put on the ground. And so we initiated moves with the then chairman of the Australian Rugby League, Kevin Humphreys, to bring the media in, the radio commentators and the TV people, and say, listen, we want to get a bit of money back for what it's cost us. And that initiated, that was the start of where we are now regarding big promotions, and I also hit the button on trademarks and royalties of our products, which you see here now, and it's certainly come a long way. But
you're the first.
I was the first, yeah, and a gentleman by the name of Hugh Hodkinson in Old Kent House in Sydney, the patent attorney. We initiated that, and I think, strange it may seem, yeah, and the zebra crossings in the back of your field, all the razzmatazz of your emblems and whatever. Yeah, Penrith started all that.
And the Pantherettes.
The Pantherettes, exactly, yeah. But they were darn good Pantherettes first year.
Were your ideas, in hindsight, ahead of their time?
I thought I was about 10 years too early. And I really mean that. A lot of people down the New South Wales Rugby League thought that too. It was fairly aggressive in those days. I was probably the youngest executive in the, to be appointed in the New South Wales executive. I was 35 or something, 36, and the executive were, you know, Ken Arthurson and Peter Moore, and Arthur Wynne was a good friend and a very close friend. But we won a few and lost a lot.
Meanwhile, the Ashurst-Stevenson feud remained the main topic of conversation among Panther supporters.
The player that I think about as being the Royce Simmons of my era was Mike Stevenson. I mean, he and Bill Ashurst came out here from Pommyland. I don't know that Big Bill ever tried real hard. I think he won a golden try or something one year, but that's about as much as he did. But he was an outstanding player, Ashurst, but I don't think he had the desire or the attitude while he was out here to do very, very well. But Steve-O, he was always, you know, first man there in the tackle. He carried the club. He was, to me, one of the great Panthers. And I probably align him with Royce Simmons of today.
Well, I didn't understand what the problem was between Mick and Bill. Bill was a wonderful, gifted player, truly. Off the field, when he presented himself like a real dag, I presume. He'd turn up to functions in thongs and T-shirts, and well, Mick Stevenson was the other way. Mick Stevenson was an ambassador, very competitive, and very, very good in what he did. He highlighted people, he welcomed people. I learned off him. Any little fellow that come to the field with his father, they were the most important people of the lot, including that the father was good enough to bring his children. You'd pat the small ones and say, mate, you must be a half of 5'8", all the best on the weekend, and they'd love it. If he was a little bit overweight and a bit big, you'd say, mate, you're probably one of the diamantic front rowers. Steve-O taught me that. Steve-O was good for rugby league and a good ambassador and a great player because he was competitive.
One of Penrith's top players at the time was future coach Tim Sheens.
Many stories told about those two guys. They're both, the problem with them both was both different styles of players, and they didn't really complement one another. Mick, a dummy half and team captain, and was always playing 3 moves ahead of himself, whereas Bill always played off the top of his head. He was very much the individualist, and the problem was that when Bill would run to one side of the ruck, Mick would go the other side, because the defence often would follow Ashurst anyway, and that could work out well. But unfortunately, though, when Bill called for the ball, Bill usually wanted it, and he was usually something on, but if Mick used him too often as a decoy, they used to blow up with one another. And of course, they had big egos. Rightly so, I suppose. They're both internationals. they tended to be a little jealous of what the other one got, or more Bill of Mick than Mick of Bill, I think, because Mick always seemed to be ahead of Bill in those sorts of stakes. You know, he had his own newspaper column, but he worked hard to get those things. But Billy wanted everything as well, and then Billy in the end walked out on the club, and it was you know, pretty disappointing, I think, for Don Parrish, who signed as coach that year, to find that the potentially the best player in our team walked out in the pre-season. But you know, the other problem too at the time was they had Bob O'Reilly in the club also, and with Bob they had 3 ball players in Ashurst, Stevenson and Bob, and all 3 different types of players. Well, you know, they all wanted the ball at the same time. When that happened, there was always a bit of pandemonium in the side as to, there's a little bit of argument always between the 3 of them as to who should have had it and which way we're supposed to go and what we're supposed to do.
Don Parrish was made coach in 1977, but it was a huge struggle. On top of Ashurst skipping town, Mike Stevenson was hit by a sickening late tackle by a Balmain forward and missed almost half the season. It was all but the end of Mike Stevenson's career. He was never the same footballer again and retired early the following year. While it was difficult for the Panthers on and off the field during that time, the club remained unique for the type of hospitality it provided for visiting teams and officials.
Well, it was a club that it had hospitality, there's no doubt about that. It's one club in those days that we were invited back to after the matches, whether we refereed poorly or we had good games. There was always an opportunity to go back to Penrith, and it was the old club, of course, in those days, and have a beer and not worry about being molested by bad supporters, because the Penrith committee, they sort of looked after us.
Now that was obviously different from what was happening in the other clubs at that time, because, you know, there were bitter times for referees, weren't they?
Oh, certainly, and not all clubs gave you the chance to go back in those sort of surroundings and have a few beers, because like players, we'd like to have a few beers after the game. I sort of got it into my head that I'd be in a far better position to talk to players in that sort of situation than I would be discussing rules on a football field. And I got a lot out of that, and I think Penrith was one of the first clubs that I could get to and talk to players in those surroundings, and I learned a lot from them, and, you know, quite frankly, I think they learned a lot from me.
1978 was another year in the doldrums, and it was a year marked with both tragedy and farce. John Farragher was made a paraplegic when a scrum collapsed at Henson Park. The incident remains the saddest in Penrith's first 25 years. Meanwhile, Penrith had made another ill-fated raid on rugby union ranks, snaring All Black prop Kent Lambert, who never made any impact in the professional game. Early in the 1978 season, Mike Stevenson called it a day, and coach Don Parrish was faced with a leadership vacuum. In a stunning move, he appointed the club's youngest ever captain.
Yeah, it was a funny sequence of events. We'd played against North Sydney about the 6th game of the year, and Penrith weren't going so well. I don't think they'd won a game in the first 6, and Don Parrish promoted 6 young fellas to first grade for their first grade game, and we won that here at Penrith Park against North Sydney. And the following Wednesday night we went down to Wagga to play against Riverina in an MCO Cup game, buoyed with the success from the North Sydney win, and we lost to Wagga to Riverina 36-2. It turned out they had players in their side like Ray Brown, Les Boyd, Greg Brentnell, and a lot of them turned out to be champions, but obviously the inexperience of us down there took them a bit lightly, and they spanked our tails. We got back to Sydney, and the next morning Mike Stevenson announced his retirement. We also had a few blokes out, and we had a side going in against Eastern Suburbs, who I think were up near the top of the competition at that stage. Bobby Fulton was their captain, and we had 6 blokes playing their second first grade game and 5 blokes playing their first grade game. And I think when Don Parrish looked around for a captain, he chose me because I'd been captaining the reserve grade side. But it was again a very big thrill, and only my second first grade game. And we went and played North Sydney at the stadium in my first game as captain, and I can remember we were getting 40.5 start on the betting cards, and we won that game. We beat them 15-13, and I'll long remember that.
Phil Gould and Tim Sheens were now playing in the same side. Greg Hartley remembers they both had something different.
Timmy, even in those days, was very much an analyst of the game. Timmy could get into a position ready to take the ball up. He'd be looking at the dummy half if there was a call on. He'd take 2 seconds to have a look at the field position of the opposition, and then he knew exactly where he was going. If he had support out wide and there was 2 there and there was 3 there, Timmy always had the attributes to go to that position and hopefully get rid of the football and keep the movement going. So he was a deep thinker, Timmy. Not many players had that ability. There were a few around with the great skills, as I mentioned before, Arthur Beetson and so on, could hit the line, turn the shoulder and offload. But Tim seemed to analyse every move like a bit of a chess game, and he's doing that today now in his coaching area. Gus was much the same too, and I refereed Gus a bit. Gus would have a look at field position. Gus knew where he was going. Gus was the catalyst for success in going forward on the blind side. He did have the ball skills to slip too. So they're very much the same sort of individuals. They may not know that themselves, although I think they would, but I noticed from the way that they played the game that, I don't say that I was an Nostradamus and knew that we're going to be great coaches in the end, but certainly I knew there was ability there and it could then go out of the playing field into the coaching field.
Despite yet again changing coaches and bringing in Len Stacker and infusing the side with new faces like Darryl Broman and Gary Petherbridge, the young Panthers struggled again in 1979. The continued poor results resulted in some bitter factional disruptions at committee and board level. Roger Cowan oversaw the running of the licensed club, but as early as 1970 had formed the view that Penrith should lead the way in reforming league administration.
I realised then pretty quickly that if we were ever going to be successful, we had to be one club, not two. And although nobody had tried it at that stage, I thought it was urgent that we try it and unify the whole place. Silly having two separate committees running the two most important things associated with the club.
But you couldn't get that happening for various reasons.
Well, it was a difficult thing because it meant that one of the committees had to virtually vote itself out of existence for it to happen. We tried amalgamation and we tried all sorts of things, but nothing was ever really accepted. We talked about it for years, and it just fell on barren ground for most of that time.
The 1980 campaign was Penrith's worst ever. Penrith grabbed the wooden spoon for the second time in their history and finished the season on an all-time low 5 points. Only Kevin Dan could salvage anything from the year when he played fullback for New South Wales. The other bright spot for Penrith was the arrival of a 20-year-old hooker from Cowra, Royce Simmons. Simmons would become a Panther legend, but almost began his career as a Rabbitoh.
Yes, could have been, Brian, but I was originally given a chance to go down there, and I went down, and my first trial, I trained down there probably for 2 months. I got a trial in a 5th grade trial, and at the time, Len Stacker, who was coach at Penrith, had also rung Barry Rushworth, who played in the 1963 Kangaroos, and he recommended me from the bush, who I'd originally played against Barry, and Len had contacted me the day before I had that trial and went down also to watch the game. And after the game, he told me that he'd like me to come up and have a trial the following week. And I was pretty keen and young then and didn't feel the bruises as much, and I said, well, what's wrong with tomorrow? And he said, fine, and I come up and I had a reasonably good game. And the future looked a little bit brighter up here as far as I was put straight into a 2nd grade trial, even had a run with the first. So I thought, there's a few more, that was the day of the import rules, and there was a few more vacancies up here, so I decided to move up to Penrith, and it was only a week or two later I got graded.
Meanwhile, the Panthers were falling apart from within, and it was time for serious action.
Yeah, well, we were having one of our, I suppose, traditional blow-ups at the time, and New South Wales League, Kevin Humphries at the time, phoned me one day and he said, look, you seem to be having a lot of troubles out there again. How about, would it help if we set up some sort of an interim committee to run it for 12 months out there, so you've got representations on it from both the board of directors of the licensed club and the football club and New South Wales Rugby League, and let's see if we can thrash out all the problems and come up with a system that will work in the future. And if you want to then get it all together into one organisation, we can do it over that 12 months. So we agreed to do that, and that's for the next 12 months. That's what we did. All the decisions were made in conjunction with sort of a three-party thing.
Ex-South Sydney administrator Charlie Gibson was appointed to run Penrith's football affairs, and after another season of mediocre results in 1981, he made some big decisions. Len Stacker was sacked as coach and replaced with John Peard, and Wallaby Union star Tony Darcy was signed to play in the Panthers' front row. Like the Union players who'd been signed before him, he never made an impact in 1st grade. The side continued treading water in 1982. And 1983 was simply more of the same.
Well, as far as the competition points went, at the end of the year it was a difficult period. We didn't win a lot of games, but I will say this, that every player I played with then tried as hard as the players that are playing today. We just lacked the depth that we've got now, and we lacked the Australian representative players that we've got now. There was no, you know, Brad Fittlers, John Cartwrights, Mark Gyers, Greg Alexanders. What we did have was a lot of players who tried very hard and a very tough side, but once we got 3 or 4 injuries, we were in trouble, and we just lacked that class player to finish off a lot of our movements and so on.
The New South Wales Rugby League's experiment with Charlie Gibson had failed, and at the end of 1983, Roger Cowan made a decisive move.
No, well, it didn't really work out. At the end of Charlie's term, we were, I think that was at the end of 83, wasn't it? We were really at a very low ebb then. We only had 1 player on contract, and there'd been some fairly costly failures, and we were... one of the biggest problems we had at that time, of course, was that we were a bit tight for money too, and we had to just keep a tight grip on it. We were building this club over here, and we were having overruns, as every building does, and we had to answer pretty carefully to the bank to make sure that we weren't suddenly running away with all the money and going broke, and so it was a tight time for everybody. So it just didn't work. You know, once again, it was a bit of a blow at the end of 83, and Charlie went.
But it was an opportunity for you, finally, to combine the running of the Leagues Club and the running of the football club into one organisation.
Yeah, well, see, it had been supposed to be one organisation before that, during Charlie's term. But the difference was that it was still sort of split. The board, Charlie was answerable to the board, and I was answerable to the board, and the board was splitting. You know, some Charlie, some on the other side, and that wasn't working either. So 84 was the first time that the board said, all right, well, let's go the whole hog and have one club, one general manager of the whole lot, and everything organised through there. Because where that's important, you see, is because a lot of things that happen with rugby league are organised by the club. You know, ground maintenance, ground catering, advertising, promotions, that's all done by staff of the licensed club. So it all has to be tied together. Rugby league can't just be an island, it's too big now. So in 1984 that started to happen.
Now tell us about the crisis meeting. You've come to the situation where now you control both football and licensed club exclusively. There's no dispute over who has what, and you come to the crisis meeting.
Yeah, well, I must admit that I was a little bit nervous about taking it over at that time because, as I say, we had no coach, we had no secretary, we had 1 player left on contract. We were battling for enough money to finance the thing. So I thought, well, let's get everybody together who I know are interested in rugby league and just see what ideas we can get out of those. So I did that one afternoon, I think it was a Saturday afternoon. We got a whole group, maybe 30 people in the room. And the theme of it was, what do we have to do to become a powerful rugby league club? And a lot of ideas came out of that meeting. And later on, we followed that up with some sort of brainstorming sessions on more specific targets. For example, what do we do about junior league? What do we do about conditioning? What do we do about all those sorts of things? And we set up small groups to brainstorm those things. And out of that, we set up a committee called the 5x5 Committee, and its purpose was to figure out ways that we could develop 5 kangaroos in 5 years. And you know, basically, from that start, we did get a lot of good ideas. A lot of people became more involved and more dedicated. People who had been left outside were now becoming involved, and you know, from there on it seemed to work.
Do you see that as the turning point for Penrith Rugby League?
Yeah, absolutely. In more ways than one. First of all, we got everybody involved at that stage, but the most important thing that happened, in my opinion, at that stage was that because it was all one administration, one person could be made responsible for getting performances on the field, and that had to be the coach. So the first thing that I wanted to do was appoint somebody who could really be given the responsibility for coaching a team, for getting the player, finding the players, even contracting with the players. So we were actually the first club to appoint a manager coach, and that was Tim Sheens.
Penrith had reached a pivotal point in their history, with everyone who was at that crisis meeting in 1983 able to recall what took place.
We had a meeting in the old Leagues Club, and me and Brad Waugh and I think Mark Levy at the time were the players' representatives, were called to the meeting and they tried to thrash things out. And as you said, I think all of us probably looked like probably trying to get away from the club at the time because things didn't look so good. But at that meeting, you know, one of the players that wasn't playing at the time, Tim Sheens, who had just had a year off, was sitting in the thing, and I said to Brad Waugh, I think, if we're any chance here, that man's got to be our coach, and he'll get all the junior blokes who have left, he'd get them all to come back and get things rolling again. And I think me and Brad at the time suggested that to Roger Cowan. He fronted Tim, who at that time had already signed to go up to Queensland to play somewhere up there. And Roger had talked to Tim, then me and Brad both rung Tim and more or less begged him to come and have a go at it. And in the end, he decided to have a go, and he got all the players back. You know, I could name probably 10 or 12 of them that were going to retire and give it away. They come back. He also started a real hard drive for the juniors, and blokes like Greg Alexander, Ben Gonzalez, Joey Vitanza, the list goes on, players who end up joining the club, and that's when we really kicked off. I think we lost our first 5 or 6 games, and we might have won 7 or 8 on the trot or something to miss the semis by a point.
I remember being asked to go along to it, and which I did, and we sat around for a good day in discussion groups and you know, thrashing different things out, what had been wrong, why we'd had, in my time there, for instance, 13 years, we'd had 8 first-grade coaches and almost as many secretaries, and numerous number of you know, players who had failed, big-name players who had failed, but then went back to play in Sydney and often were successful again, you know, so there was something wrong, and he really tried to thrash it out that day. So I remember having to leave later in the afternoon because it was my young fella's first birthday, and the next day Roger rang me, to my surprise, with the offer of doing the first-grade coaching job.
When I asked him would he like to take it on, he said he'd had to go and think about it because his plans were pretty fixed. He just had to be going. His wife was fairly keen, I believe, to go to Queensland, and all his plans were made. He sold his house and everything, I think. So he said he'd have to go and talk about it, and he did. And he came back, and I think I had to talk to him again a couple of times, but finally he said yeah, and then he would. And then I got a call from him one day, and he said, no, look, I've changed my mind, I'm going to Queensland. I said, oh, you can't do that. Come in and bring your wife in, and we'll have dinner, and we'll have to talk about it. So in they came, both of them, and spent another night talking both of them into it. And finally I did. I think he was happy that he did in the long run.
Seems to me that that was the turning point for the club, the arrival of Tim Sheens, that crisis meeting, the way that the club was restructured. You know, the whole thing takes on a new complexion from 1984.
Well, yeah. Plus the probably the one board come together too, and everyone went in the one direction instead of different directions being taken all over the place. And also along come a couple of blokes like John Cartwright and Greg Alexander and Mark Geyer, and all them blokes come onto the scene pretty soon then too, and they made a hell of a difference. And there was a lot of new blood come into the club. I suppose, you know, air of excitement around, new coach, and things did roll from that period onwards.
Penrith's success in 1984 was more improbable in light of the drain on resources that had been forced by the opening of the new licensed club. The project had run over budget, and belts were being tightened across the board.
And as Roger said to me at the time, we've got no money. We really, realistically, had no sign-on fees. In fact, I think we were playing at the time for a revolutionary style of payment, which was $1,000 for every game you play. So the maximum we could earn was $22,000. That's if you played every game in the competition. So, you know, we had a handful of very good, positive, professional type of players: Mark Levy, Lou Zavanovic, Roy Simmons, Brad Waugh. So we had a nucleus of a side, and so we just started a drafting system. I got some very good staff together, Cliff Cartwright and a whole host of people that you know, if I start naming them, I'll miss someone. But they were very, very positive. We were on a win to nothing. I mean, Roger indicated to me that if we won one game, we'd be lucky. Most people said I was crazy taking them on. However, I knew that there was plenty of spirit in the club and that there was plenty of potential in the area. Probably the main thing that we decided, first of all, we had to draft through as many kids and as many people as we could, and the only thing we could really offer was opportunity. because, you know, we didn't have a first grade side, even on paper, to kick off with. So anyone that came to the club had a pretty good chance of playing first grade. And I think probably the signing of Greg Alexander was probably the major turning point, if anything, as well as, you know, many other inputs. It was Greg's signing that was important. He decided to stay with the club. I knew his stepfather very well, and I convinced him that Penrith would be the place for him because of opportunity. Now, Canterbury and Parramatta were chasing him, but he was always going to play second grade as a halfback in those two clubs with Mortimer and Sterling. He opted to give it a go because he wanted to play first grade, and of course the rest is history as far as that's concerned.
I'd already spoken to Parramatta, and I think I'd spoken to Penrith before. I spoke to Tim too. I think it was to Charlie Gibson. And then after I spoke to Tim, there was really no sort of, you know, I was always going to play for Penrith anyway. And after speaking to him, and him sort of telling me that, you know, I'd have a chance of playing first grade, you know, it sort of swung me around. But, you know, I think I was always going to play with him anyway.
Right, so even if that assurance hadn't been made that you would have a good chance of playing first grade, you still would have been a Panther?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, so it didn't take long for you know, Tim Sheens to be true to his word. You were in first grade very early on in the season.
Yeah, well, he, you know, a lot of people weren't expecting us to go good that year, and you know, I think he had to pick the side on form, and I'd had a couple of fair games in reserve grade, and Darryl Griffin got injured, and that sort of left a spot open for me.
It was an incredible year for that reason. Nobody was expecting Penrith to go well, and the side almost made the semi-finals. Was that a surprise to the players?
No, because, you know, we probably weren't thinking that far ahead. You know, we were just taking 1 week at a time and trying to get, you know, do the job as best we could. And, you know, we had some good players and some young blokes that were goers. So, you know, at the end of the season, we didn't think back and think, well, gee, you know, we went really well. We didn't expect to. We just sort of took week by week, and, you know, and it was a sort of under Timmy who led us well all year. You know, we sort of won more than we lost.
But we were very determined to get very fit, and we did. We had another very good player at the time, Warren Fenton, and we had a lot of good working type players in the club, and they were prepared to knuckle down and train and get fit. And the attitude we adopted was to be professional. People said I banned drinking. I didn't actually ban drinking. What I did ban, though, was Friday night after training, bringing your disco clothes and hanging them on the hook, and then going to the disco till 3 in the morning, and then having to train Saturday morning to train it out of them. We decided that, you know, there's no problem about having a drink, but if it was with your girlfriend or your wife, or on a quiet beer at home, but there was no sessions. And what I meant by that was there was going to be no discos. You know, average age at the time was about 19 in the whole club. 50-odd players, we had an average age of 19. I think 3 of them were married, so they were potentially, you know, they were disco nuts. They were potentially they could be quite easily run off the rails. So, and I'd seen that happen in my time. You know, too many of them going to the Friday and Saturday nights, and Penrith had hit the wall halfway through the second half. We were noted for it. Lead till then and then run out of steam. So we were going to get very fit. We were going to get professional with our attitude and make football #1 priority, and any player that wasn't interested in that could see you later.
Sheen's bold approach paid off, and the side performed beyond expectations, all but making the semi-finals. Sheens was named Dally M Coach of the Year, Greg Alexander the Rookie of the Year, and Roy Simmons the Hooker of the Year. The scene had been set for a new Panther era. In 1985, the club made the first grade semi-finals for the first time in their history. Fans had waited a long time, but at last the side seemed to be on track. Tim Sheen's band of youngsters were developing into professional footballers.
You know, I don't think, again in 85, I don't think we just said, well, okay, well, let's make the semis. I think we sort of said, well, let's, you know, try and get to a certain stage after the first round, and then, you know, we're sort of on the road to the semis. So, you know, we took it stage by stage.
It was a very exciting period in the club's history, wasn't it? That first semi-final, the desperate last rounds, that great last round win over Eastern Suburbs, the play-off against Manly. The community were just as excited as you guys were.
Yeah, well, you know, I think you can just look back to last year. You know, the community got behind us back in 85, and it was big just for us to actually get in the semis, you know, for the first time. So, you know, it was a terrific time back then, as it was last year.
They tied for 5th place with Manly after thrashing East in the final round of the 1985 season.
It'll still be played
That meant that Penrith would have to fight through a midweek playoff to tackle Parramatta in the semi-final the following weekend. The experienced Manly side fought for their lives, and the game was forced into extra time before Penrith came away with the money.
There's the siren, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the jubilation and the emotion. They're hugging, embracing, I think even kissing each other. The Panthers of Penrith have made their first semi-final in the Sydney Rugby League Premiership ever. 19 years they've waited, 19 years in the queue. Look at the scenes down there now as the 10 Sports cameras take you in as close as we dare to go.
Roycey, how does it feel to become part of that Penrith history?
It's great. It's unreal. I don't know what to say. It's just tremendous.
There were emotional scenes after the game as long-time officials and players alike wept openly as the side forced its way through to the club's first semi-final. Experienced players like Simmons and Gerard tried to keep a lid on the celebrations.
Well, at the time, it was very exciting. If anything, probably I learned a lot from that because everyone got excited. I think I remember me and Tim in the dressing room trying to cool everyone down because we knew we had a big game in a few days. But the thing was we won a lot of games in a row to make the semis. Then we made it. Then we had to go into extra time in that 100-minute slog out with Manly. Then we made it, and the relief was just that, was that just pumped through you, the relief that we'd finally broken, made the semis, and unfortunately that's where we left it, because when we come out against Parramatta next week, they just blew us apart after the 100 minutes hard game, and probably more or less a medal thing that we'd finally broken the ice, and probably were just there for the pickings, really.
The heroic nature of the victory only intensified the emotion, and by the time Saturday's semi-final against Parramatta rolled around, Penrith were an easy mark.
Was it a big come down to go into the semi-final that, a few days later and cop such a hiding?
Yeah, it was, and I think it was, it was bigger for some blokes than others. I was, only young then. I thought, well, gee, we've made the semis. That's pretty good. So I wasn't really, I wasn't broken-hearted when, Parramatta beat us by that big score. Like, I was disappointed. But, I think blokes like Simo and that, who'd been playing a lot longer, realised that was a sort of a big chance, and were pretty broken-hearted about it.
They went down 38-6, but hopes were high that Penrith would continue their improvement into 1986 and beyond. Royce Simmons had one dream realised when he became Penrith's first Test player in 1986.
Well, firstly for myself, it was tremendous. It's something that you dream about, and I suppose you always think yourself good enough, but you don't think it'll ever come. And I remember when they even announced the side after we won the State of Origin Series 3-0 that year, they announced the side after the last game, and everyone knows I like a beer, and when the side was announced, I was the last name read out, and Peter Sterling went to shake my hand, and I dropped my beer and grabbed his hand. I caught it, of course, before it hit the ground, but yeah, it was a great shock, and I was very proud to do it because the first Penrith player to do it, and as earlier it did break the ice, I think for players that the four Kangaroos have had just went away. I think that it, showed the way, probably encouraged them a lot.
We turned over a lot of players in those first 3 years, a lot of players. In fact, within 3 years, we almost turned over, by about 1986, we'd almost turned over the complete 1984 outfit. But to do so, we gradually unearthed and came up with the potential young players that we've, the guys and Cartwrights, Van der Voort, Greg Alexander, the list goes on, Stevie Carter, all those players, Barry Walkers, were all drafted in at one stage or another in those first 3 years, and either by bringing them in from the country or producing them out of our own juniors. And at the moment, they're all growing through at the same time. It was always going to be, I remember saying at the time, it was always going to be Penrith within 5 years of those years, which is about now. They were always going to be a force because they'd have played 4 or 5 years together, and they'd be maturing into their mid-20s as a unit, and which is what they're doing now. And that same nucleus of that was formed in 85, 84 is there today.
They were tremendously exciting years, 80, 84 and 85, but then the side didn't kick on in the years subsequent to that, say 87. It was a disastrous season. What went wrong?
Well, we weren't in a position, we still weren't in a position to buy anything in. We were always trying to make do with the younger players. And I remember Roger Cowan saying to me in 84, he said, within 5 years, he said, within 5 years you'll be able to buy Wally Lewis and sit him on the bench. That's how much money we'll have. And the year that I left was basically, that was what had happened. They came up and paid astronomical money for Peter Kelly and Chris Mortimer. You know, they probably were the two major signings for that club. I mean, in 5 years we hadn't signed a player. I mean, Jeff Gerard was kicked out of Manly and we converted Jeff with some hard... Jeff had never been to the gym in his life, and we got him fit and got him keen, and Jeff showed the way. But you needed a couple of professional winner-type players to add to those younger players, because they were young and they were still losing games with inexperience. And, you know, blokes like Royce and that were carrying the side on their back, and Greg's brilliance was being blotted out because he was easily spotted all the time. But in the end, the signing of those two players seemed to start to change the place around. And of course, from then on, they were in a position to buy players. I think they bought McIndoe and Simon, the other winger, and they started to be able to bring players in. And of course, at the same time, the other players started to mature. The young Bentleys and, you know, Guy, Cartwright, as I said, Vandervoort, those types of players. And so it all sort of clicked together, started to click together then. But 87 was a bad year. A lot of the problem in 87 was that the new clubs came in 88, Newcastle, Gold Coast and so on, and a lot of the younger players in our club who were halfway through the year had signed with them. And there was a bit of a rift inside the club because of that. I think 18 players had decided to sign at that stage and were leaving the club. But it was difficult for the guys who were staying to play with them. And then Royce was injured, and worse still, Greg had that bad eye gouge and missed the last few games. Also, during the year, we had that pinnacle we reached. We made the National Panasonic final against Balmain and got beaten. And from then on, it was a sort of a negative year. It was the only thing we really were a chance to win that year, and when we got beat there, things went downhill. I think we lost about our last 9 games, which was a disastrous time for everyone.
87 was a terrible year, I think. That was the 4th year Tim had been there, and I really think he needed new players to sort of make an impression. You know, we still had the same sort of blokes at the club in 87, and I think it was hard on Timmy to try and get us motivated for the season. I'd come back from a kangaroo tour, and as again, like the semi-final in 85, I was coming off a sort of a high after a kangaroo tour, and I wasn't probably switched on as I should have been in 87.
There were discipline problems in the team at that time as well, weren't there? There were players who, you know, weren't completing their training schedules properly and so forth. And was that a case of just, you know, Tim had been there a long time with the same group of guys, and it began to break down?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on it, but yeah, I just think we needed some new blood in there, or Timmy needed some new players, sort of thing. Everything just started to get a bit stale, and you know, there were a few blokes that weren't happy at the club. Not me, but you know, I was, you know, and things just started to fall apart a bit. But you know, not Tim's fault, but you know, we needed something different.
Was it to do with the fact that, you know, so many guys had signed with other clubs, the new clubs that had arrived on the scene, Newcastle, Gold Coast, Brisbane, they were signing up a lot of, particularly Gold Coast and Newcastle, signing up a lot of Penrith.
That was probably
guys.
it. Like, you know, I think just the overall way the club was that year. You know, as you said, like, there were a lot of blokes that weren't happy. There were a lot of blokes that weren't coming up to Tim's requirements at training. And, you know, that sort of caused a lot of blokes to sort of turn a bit on the club. And, you know, there was a bit of bickering sort of in the club. So I think the whole thing led to a pretty disastrous year.
Ron Willie's arrival in 1988 spelled instant success for the club. Penrith quickly climbed back to credibility, just missing out on the semi-finals after bowing out in a 5th-place playoff to the Ellery Hanley-empowered Balmain side, who went on to make the grand final that year.
When they brought me and Chris Mortimer over and Graham Bradley from Illawarra, we put a lot of starch into the side, and what they really lacked was the will to win, I think. And with us there, we'd been used to winning with Canterbury and that, and it's something that once you do, you want to keep on doing. And hopefully that rubbed off on the younger players, which I think it did, like Mark Geyer and them. You know, it's such a fine line between winning and losing. You put the same effort in every week, but it might be just that 10 seconds extra that'll sway the game your way, and that's what it's all about, just being conscious of what you're doing for 80 minutes and not just 79 or whatever.
The addition of speedsters Alan McIndoe and Andrew Simons in 1989 gave Willie the strike power out wide that he'd lacked the previous year, and the Panthers had a tremendous season. Willie took the side to second place on the premiership table, their best ever. With expectations high, something went wrong during the semi-final campaign. Penrith missed their chance, losing both semi-final encounters. There was surprise at Willie's decision to use rookie Brad Fittler ahead of Chris Mortimer. And after the season was over, some players were privately saying that they had lost confidence in the veteran coach.
I found Ron a hard taskmaster. We didn't do long sessions, but what we did was very hard and very disciplined. And Ron wasn't a tactical coach, and he wasn't, in my opinion, up to the standard of a couple of the coaches who are around at the moment, such as Warren Ryan and Phil Gould, because Ron was just unfortunately born a bit too early for the modern game of football. So, but I've got a lot of respect for Ron. We had a few run-ins, verbal run-ins together, and but we always sorted them out. He's that type of bloke. He's honest, and if you had a problem, you could work them out if you were man enough to stand up for yourself and confront him. A lot of people got offside through not standing up for themselves. So it's an ego thing to get on, not on top of the coach, but to have a good rapport with him.
Greg Alexander said he had few regrets about Willie's 2 years at the helm.
Yeah, well, I just think they needed something different. You know, I don't know what was on offer in '88 and who had applied for the job, but you know, Ron Willie, he did a good job with us, you know, in that first year and the second year, and we bought some new players. So you know, that's the lift the club needed back, you know, to sort of pick up from '87. We needed something new, and that sort of did the job with Kelly, Mortimer, and you know, Ron Willie.
Now, it was well documented that certainly Ron Willie wasn't as appreciative of your style of football as Phil Gould subsequently turned out to be. It was also the period of time, the New Zealand Test, when you were replaced by Des Hasler. It must have been a very difficult, despite the results of the Penrith side, a difficult time for you personally.
Yeah, probably not as hard as some people make out. You know, I always played first grade under Ron Willie, so, you know, we weren't the best of mates, but we weren't sort of, like, he just didn't wipe me completely. You know, I always played first grade, and I represented Australia playing under Ron Willie at halfback, and I never have under anyone else. So, you know, they weren't as bad at times as sort of are made out. You know, I reached the stage for Australia in '89, so, you know, even though I got replaced in that test, it wasn't a big disappointment to me. That the best part about it was I got there, you know, and I'd made it, sort of thing. Whether I hung onto it or not was, well, you know, it wasn't a huge blow to me, but, you know, I got there.
Roger Cowan was keen to avoid a repeat of 1987 and sought out a meeting with Willie to see what could be done.
You know, there was a great furor when he left, but it was unfair to Ron Willie. It was definitely unfair. You know, I was very sorry that happened, because he was a very good coach. He got us into the finals both years, and you know, what more could you ask?
Was the reason he left basically because what had been built through Tim Sheens just sidetracked for those 2 years? Despite the results, there was a different philosophy under Ron Willie, despite the results.
Yeah. Ron Willie was a man who gained immediate respect when he took over the side, and he maintained that. But it just seemed at the end of the second year that there was a change coming over the club. Now, you know, I may have been wrong, and other people I was being advised by may have been wrong about it, but we felt that there was something creeping into the club which we couldn't really put our finger on, that needed a new direction. We needed to do something about bringing players in more full-time if we could do it, And we tried to do that, and we're still trying to do it. And we just needed a slightly new direction, and particularly in a direction with the juniors. And I think that was, I sat down and talked to Ron about it at the end of the second year, and it was quite, there was nothing. I think Ron and I are both still good friends. But if you read the press at the time, you would think we'd be deadly enemies.
Now, was it a stroke of luck that Phil Gould resigned from Canterbury about the same time?
It really was, yeah, and it seemed like a very coincidental bit of luck. I know, but it was luck. I don't know whether... at that stage, we were looking at a couple of other coaches, and including Phil, because we knew that Phil... I was always keen on Phil coming here eventually. I knew he was pretty keen. He was saying in the papers that he'd like to be here, but at that time he was still on contract at Canterbury.
He said it with us too on 2KM.
But that he'd like to come. Yeah, in fact, that's where I heard about it. But he was saying quite openly that he'd like eventually to come here, and I thought, well, that'd be great. So even if we had to do something in a shorter term, until he finished his contract with Canterbury, that we'd probably even consider that. Or if he finished Canterbury and had to wait another year for us, because that's the difficulty, getting the overlap between coaches while they finish commitments in one place and are ready to go to another. So it just worked, it worked out very well for us.
And you didn't have half a season prior to coming at Penrith to have a look at what was going on and determine who were the players you needed to build on and so forth. It must have been difficult to arrive at a club and you've got a bunch of players to run with and build a side that was going to make the grand final.
Yeah, the groundwork had been done over a number of years here at Penrith, so far as player talent had gone. I'd inherited what they were ready to go in with for the 1990 season, but they'd accumulated a terrific bunch of blokes and good footballers, and the staff were terrific. And there were teething problems obviously early when you have a new coach and new ways, and it wasn't all plain sailing early, but it never is. But by halfway through the season, I think we were all aware of what needed to be done and what we needed to do to succeed. And I really thought there was a turning point halfway through the year there where we really picked up the bit and made our charge towards the semi-finals. And history now says we went to a grand final and could have been winners, but we weren't.
But obviously, there must have been when you're talking about that point of the season, when the side picked up the bit, was that the point of the season when everybody realised that, Phil Gould's coaching methods were for now and to leave the old ways behind?
Yeah, I think there came a turning point where I think we were beaten pretty resoundingly here about the 8th or 9th game of the season by Canterbury at Penrith Park. And we sat down and looked at that game along the lines of they did to us what we'd been trying so hard to work for in the past 3 or 4 months. And when they sat there and saw it being done to them and realised that, that it was not so much a better way to play football, but more a successful way, I think that's where things started to fall into place. And from then on, we really had a terrific run. I think we won 13 of our next 15 games or something like that. It was a really good trot we went through, and by the time we got to the semi-finals, we were ready for that class of football.
It turned out to be a good thing for the club because they got 2 professional people in Phil Gould, who is ruthless as far as particulars go. He will not leave anything undone or let the side be underprepared for any game. He makes sure everything in his mind is done to perfection, and he likes everyone else to think that way. Plus, he's a very astute coach, and he done a lot of his training under Warren Ryan, who one of his philosophies was, I'll coach you to be a coach one day. So what that means is he wants you to understand everything that he's teaching you so you can comprehend that, and that you know what you're going to do when you go out in the field. So it's a learning process as well. So Phil's one of those sort of blokes who's got a gift to relate to other people, and he's a good bloke at the same time, but you cannot be too friendly with the players, so he's got to cut the line somewhere and turn the discipline aspect of the game into action. So, but both blokes I've got a tremendous amount of respect for, and I get on very good personally with them. Everyone's got their ideas, and I disagreed with a few both their ideas, but you've always got to listen to the boss, and they're the bosses, mate, so I've just got to cop that on the chin.
Gould successfully built on and then advanced what Willie had achieved before him. The Panthers went into their third semi-final campaign in 1990, full of experience and resolve. Their performances against Brisbane and Canberra in the semi-finals showed that the Panthers were at last coming of age.
You look back on it now, and as much as, again, Phil Gould and a few of the senior players tried to calm everyone down after we won the major semi to go into the grand final, you could still just see it pumping through everyone that they'd finally making a grand final, and very excited. And although I think we backed up and played nearly to our potential the following week, we probably could have dug just a little bit deeper and maybe had have snatched that one if we hadn't been so excited through the week. You know, even the people around town really were saying, "Oh, you've made the grand final," and they were happy with us making the grand final.
Beaten in their first title attempt, the side vowed to go one better in 1991, the club's 25th year in the big time.
I think we've got the best structure of any club that's playing rugby league in Australia, and we've had it for some time. In fact, other clubs are copying our structure. I noticed recently where it's part of the criteria to be a member of the Winfield Cup now for clubs to have somebody permanently running the junior league. Well, up until this year, we were the only club that had somebody running the junior league, and we've had that for 5 years. I know that after I incorporated the junior league, I had 4 or 5 other junior leagues ring and ask me how I'd done it so they could do it themselves because they could see the benefits. And we've got Jim Jones now working full-time as a development officer, going around all the junior league games, organising trials, bringing players through. I've got that many players' names on my table that I've got to talk to about next year, but it's not funny. And when you look at the work that was done by the likes of Jim Jones and Ross Gigg before us, I mean, these young players that are getting the opportunity now are getting the benefit from all that work. So the answer to your question is a definite and certain yes.
Well, there have been some changes that we made happen. I think you're talking about perhaps the new theme song, the new colours, and the sort of drive towards a much wider sponsorship. You know, we made those happen.
Now, 1991 saw the unveiling of the new Panther colours, from the old brown and white to the multicoloured strip. What was the philosophy or reason behind the change?
Well, I suppose the philosophy was that it was time for a change because we'd played for so long in the brown and whites and hadn't achieved any great success. And more than that, the face of league had changed because it was now into television and marketing, and souvenirs and merchandise were very much an integral part of both building up a team following and having people feel part of the team. And no one wants to wear brown and white. I mean, it's not really fashionable stuff. And so we decided after a test that people would buy if we changed the colours. So we changed the colours.
And has that proven to be correct?
Well, before we changed, our position on the souvenir merchandise list was 16th. We had a rating of 0 in the marketplace, and the figures just recently released by the league gave us #1 spot with 16% of the market. So if the other 15 clubs have got 84% of the market, it shows that we've done exceptionally well. It'll be probably, even in this establishment alone, more than $500,000 worth of merchandise in this 1 year.
We've waited a long time for this from the people of Penrith. Yes.
Welcome back to the Sydney Football Stadium. Royce Simmons and family continue on their merry way as the champions of 1991 make this lap of honour. Let's take you back down sideline with David Fordham.
Thank you, Graham. Well, Megan Alexander and Beverly Walker are both waiting for brother, fiancé and son. Megan, what's the feeling like?
Oh, I can't describe it. It's the best feeling I've ever felt. It's great.
Big brother was brilliant and so was Mark.
Yeah, they were great. They were all great.
Beverly, what does it mean for you for Barry?
Oh, so proud. So proud.
Okay. Kevin Guy's here as well. Kevin, you're waiting that big brute of a son of yours coming here. How proud are you of him?
Very proud, mate, very proud, yeah.
And we have Mrs. Alexander up there as well. Describe the feeling.